It did not become messy when Remy Ma finally put it in a record. It became messy the minute Claressa Shields and Papoose started trying to sell the public two different versions of the same relationship, because now we've got December 2024 screenshots, a May 2025 Breakfast Club sit-down, a May 2025 Instagram Live explosion, an April W.Y.F.L diss record, and a 2026 freestyle run, all pointing at the exact same uncomfortable truth. The story people keep trying to tell is that Papoose is some silent wounded saint caught in chaos, when in reality the public narrative keeps changing every time the cameras turn on. And that is why this whole thing matters more than gossip. Because the personal stakes are obvious: marriage, divorce, children, reputations, and whatever was happening behind those closed doors. But the cultural stakes are bigger, because this is about how fast hip-hop audiences will cling to a good guy brand long after the facts stop lining up cleanly. And the systemic stakes are even uglier, because the moment somebody has a polished public image, half the media ecosystem starts protecting the image instead of interrogating the contradictions. What makes this wild is that people keep focusing on the loudest part of the drama and missing the quiet pattern underneath it. The fight is not the full story. The diss record is not the full story. The comments are not the full story. The story is that every time the narrative seems ready to settle, another public statement appears that makes less sense than the one before it. One day the relationship is old news, then the divorce is somehow still paperwork in limbo. One day there's supposedly no ill will, then somebody is talking about jumping in the ring for $1. One day the line is that nobody is using this situation for attention, then the same name somehow keeps surfacing in interviews, clips, reposts, freestyle reactions, and viral conversation loops. So when people act like Remy responding is the beginning of the chaos, I need everybody to stop right there. That is the wrong question. The real question is why the people asking for peace keep stepping in front of microphones and giving the internet fresh fuel. And when we get to the part about who controlled the image, who benefited from the silence, and why victim is the one role Captain Cease and Desist absolutely cannot play in this story, that's when this whole thing clicks into place. Because the contradiction is not small. It is the story. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Listen, I want to set the table properly, because a lot of people online keep reacting to fragments and then pretending they've got the whole movie. They do not. The broad timeline is already enough to tell you this is not some random flare-up. Remy Ma and Papoose built one of the most recognizable, black love, public brands in rap-adjacent culture for years. That image mattered. It mattered to fans, to interviewers, to reality TV storytelling, to every discussion where people wanted an example of loyalty, patience, and ride-or-die love. Then the cracks that had been rumored for a long time finally exploded into public view in late 2024, when Remy posted screenshots and made it clear that Claressa Shields was now part of the conversation. That alone should have told everybody the old image was over. Not shaken. Over. But instead of the internet accepting that the brand had collapsed, people immediately started hunting for a replacement story that still let them preserve the old mythology. That's why you got this weird rush to paint Papoose as the only mature one in the room, the only one above the mess, the only one trying to move on peacefully. And I'm sorry, but that's where the logic starts limping. Because if you're truly above the circus, why do your public talking points keep surfacing in the circus? If the separation is old and the relationship is settled, why does everybody around it keep sounding like they're still litigating optics? If the point is private healing, why are these comments arriving in public interviews, public posts, public reactions, and public music? Does everybody understand how crazy that is? Now add Claressa into it, because this is where the narrative gets even more layered. Claressa is not some random bystander who got unwillingly dragged into a private dispute out of nowhere. By her own public remarks in 2025, she described the divorce as the elephant in the room, said she and Papoose were together all the time, on the phone every day, FaceTiming every day, and in love. That matters. Not because it proves every allegation floating online, but because it destroys the fake innocent framing that this was all invented by haters. No, this was a public relationship discussed publicly by the people in it. Which means the public is going to judge the timeline, the tone, and the contradictions. That comes with the territory. And then there's Remy's role. Because I know some people want the easy lazy read, which is, she's bitter, she's crashing out, she should move on. Why is she still rapping about them? And to that I say, move on from what exactly? From a marriage that, according to the public reporting and the statements flying around, still had unresolved legal and emotional debris attached to it? From a man she said needed to sign papers? from a public image she helped build, while other people were now rewriting the collapse of that image in real time. This is where nuance matters. You do not have to agree with every move Remy makes to understand why she would reject a version of history that turns her into the villain of a story other people also publicly fed. So the stakes right now are not just who said what. Musically, this matters because Remy used records and freestyles to answer a narrative assault instead of giving the audience some neat PR statement. Culturally, it matters because fans are watching the demolition of a once-celebrated relationship brand and trying to decide who lied, who performed, and who's still performing now. Financially, it matters because everybody involved has platforms, appearances, interviews, content cycles, and brand value tied to perception. Reputationally, it matters because in hip-hop, once people decide you're authentic, they defend you through contradiction. And that is exactly why this story keeps getting flattened into nonsense. The wrong person keeps getting framed as the only casualty, and the public record does not support that clean little fairy tale. So the question is not whether the situation is ugly. It is. The question is who has actually been consistent and who has been trying to keep one foot in sympathy and the other foot in publicity. Start with the surface evidence, because this is where the false narrative crowd gets uncomfortable fast. Evidence piece number 1 is the late 2024 screenshot moment. According to publicly reported coverage, Remy Ma posted text exchanges that appeared to show Claressa frustrated with Papoose over not letting her know he got home safely, with wording about him being the one who was married and about sleeping on the phone. Now, I need to be precise here. Screenshots alone do not magically explain every detail of a relationship. But what they absolutely do is kill the fiction that there was no overlap, no secrecy, no emotional mess, and no reason for the wife to feel publicly humiliated. The minute that hit the timeline, that everybody is imagining this defense should have died. Yet, somehow people still kept trying to sell that Remy was just manufacturing smoke out of thin air. Based on what? Based on everybody closing their eyes? Evidence piece number 2 is Papoose's own public response after that eruption. Public reporting from the time says he pushed back hard, claimed he had asked for a divorce numerous times, accused Remy of cheating, and tried to reposition himself as someone who had already emotionally moved on. Fine. But here is where the image audit begins. If you are saying you've requested divorce numerous times, then the public naturally expects clean finality energy, adult transition energy, consistency energy. What they do not expect is a rolling cycle where the divorce is forever being handled, while the new relationship is simultaneously being sold to the public as stable, serious, day-to-day, and beyond debate. That mismatch is not Remy's invention. That mismatch exists inside the public statements themselves. Evidence piece number 3 is Claressa Shields' own Breakfast Club framing in May 2025. She called the divorce the elephant in the room. She said it would get handled. She said she was secure. She said they were together all the time, talking and FaceTiming every day, and that they loved each other. Again, none of that is a crime. But it does matter for narrative purposes. Because once you speak like that in a major interview platform, you are no longer the mysteriously detached outsider who just happened to get dragged in unfairly. You are now helping define the story. You are helping frame the timeline. You are helping tell the audience how settled, how advanced, and how legitimate the relationship is. So if people later question whether the rollout has been contradictory, that is not misogyny, that is basic pattern recognition. Evidence piece number 4 is Remy's May 2025 Instagram live, which TMZ and Complex both summarized in detail. On that live, she said Papoose had her lawyer's information, said everything was signed and ready to go, and even said she would pay for the divorce if money or legal retention was the holdup. She also claimed they had not slept in the same bed since May 2022 and said she wanted nothing from him. Now, I am not telling you to take every emotional statement in a live stream as courtroom fact. What I am telling you is this: that is not the language of a woman trying to cling to a man at all costs. That is the language of someone rejecting the narrative that she is the roadblock while also saying, in public, go finish what you keep talking about. And that is why Captain Cease and Desist being painted as the lone victim already starts sounding shaky. Evidence piece number 5 is the music. W.Y.F.L matters because it was not just a messy diss, it was a direct response to one of the biggest image battles in this whole saga, the ghostwriting claim. Public reporting around the song highlighted bars where Remy pushed back on Papoose's claim that he wrote the bulk of her hits, including Conceited. That is major. Because once the breakup got ugly, the narrative war was no longer just romantic. It became authorship, talent, legacy, and credibility. And when Remy hit that beat and basically said, "Stop lying about my pen," she was not just insulting an ex. She was protecting her professional identity. Those are two different things. Can we have the real conversation now? Evidence piece number 6 is the reaction pattern. Complex reported that Fat Joe reposted W.Y.F.L. and that names like Memphis Bleak, Murda Mook, Mia X, and Millis showed support in the comments. That does not prove every single accusation Remy has made. Let's be adults. But it does tell you something important. People in and around the culture did not hear that record and react like it came out of nowhere. They heard it as a real entry in an already understood public conflict. In other words, the culture did not treat the record like random slander. The culture treated it like a response in an existing war. And then in 2026, the Ever Since You Left Me Bronx remix kept the pressure on, because once again the internet immediately locked onto bars that many people interpreted as shots at Papoose and Claressa. Whether you think those lines were subtle or obvious, the larger point is that the same triangle keeps reappearing because the same unresolved symbolic fight keeps reappearing. Not just who loved who. Not just who cheated who. But who gets to define the story after the collapse. And if your defense is, why is Remy still talking? I've got a better question. Why does the material still keep presenting itself like the story is unfinished? And oh, do I have more for you? Because this is the part the fake neutral crowd never wants to sit with. They want to act like this is just one emotional rapper lashing out into the void, when the actual public record shows repeated statements, repeated appearances, repeated framing devices, and repeated attempts to soften how all of this looks. And I know the Captain Cease-and-Desist fan club is not going to like this one, but if your whole argument depends on pretending the other two people were completely quiet and completely respectful while Remy was the only one making noise, your argument is already cooked. Because next we have to talk about the community reactions, the side comments, the jokes, the interview energy, and the little moments where the culture itself started telling you this, Pap is the innocent one's story was taking on water. And when we get to the part about how one joke from Lil Wayne said more in 7 words than 100 think pieces ever did, you're going to see exactly why this narrative started slipping. Now let's move into the cultural evidence, because this is where stories stop being about documents and start being about atmosphere. The first big cultural clue was the way people reacted to the public exposure back in 2024 and afterward. The conversation did not land like a clean morality play. It landed like confusion mixed with side-eye. That's important. When audiences genuinely believe someone is the spotless victim, they usually simplify the discourse fast. That did not happen here. People argued over timelines, argued over who knew what, argued over whether Claressa entered late or earlier than the public knew, and argued over whether Papoose had been managing optics for a long time. Even the confusion itself is evidence, because it tells you the public sensed contradiction. The second piece is how Claressa herself kept having to publicly clarify and re-clarify the relationship. In one public wave, she responded to holiday rumors and pushed back on the idea that Papoose spent Christmas with Remy, saying he spent it with family and not his ex-wife. Think about that. That is not the behavior of somebody floating above the drama altogether. That is active narrative management. That is stepping into the public square to shape perception about proximity, legitimacy, and status. Again, she has every right to do that. But once you do it, the audience has every right to read you as part of the storytelling machine. The third piece is the tone of the Breakfast Club interview itself. The Shade Room's recap made it very clear that Claressa was not simply sitting back while Papoose handled his own mess. She jumped in. Repeatedly. She explained divorce timing. She emphasized they'd been together over 1.5 years. She said people act like divorces don't happen. She argued that when she came into the picture, he was already separated. That is a lot of authorship over a narrative that some people still want to describe as her being dragged unfairly into. No, that was participation. That was positioning. That was public relations by conversation. The fourth piece is the "I'll fight her for $1 moment with Jemele Hill, as reported by Vibe. Claressa said her issue with Remy was not about Papoose, but about Remy allegedly posting her phone number, and that people framing it as being over a man was beneath her. And let me say this carefully, because nuance matters here. If someone leaks your private number, being angry about that is understandable. Full stop. That counterargument is real. But here's the dismantling of the broader point. If your goal is to lower the temperature and remove yourself from a perception of relationship drama, threatening to put hands on somebody for $1 in a public interview is not exactly giving Monk on the Mountain energy. It keeps the story hot. It keeps the triangle alive. It keeps the audience focused on the feud. So no, you cannot simultaneously say, I'm above this, and then hand the algorithm a flamethrower. The fifth piece is the reaction to Remy's 2026 freestyle clips. The Shade Room article about the Bronx remix showed comments splitting in a very telling way. Some people said the bars proved Remy's pen was alive and that the ghostwriting narrative looked flimsier by the day. Others said she needed to stop mentioning them. And there it is again. Not resolution, but fracture. A fanbase divided not because the facts are clear, but because the image war is still underway. And if the image war is still underway, then stop telling me only one person is participating in it. The sixth piece is the support and signal boosts around Remy's records. Fat Joe reposting W.Y.F.L was not just nostalgia. It was symbolic backing. Comments from other respected names mattered too, because hip-hop is a culture where cosigns often communicate more than formal statements. People close enough to the game to understand how narratives get spun did not rush to treat Remy like she had lost her mind. They treated her like she was unloading on something real. That doesn't mean every detail is proven. It means the energy around the response was recognition, not disbelief. The seventh piece is the clowning. Never underestimate the joke layer in hip-hop culture, because jokes are often the culture's fastest lie detector. Lil Wayne's reported line about Papoose liking somebody that could beat his ass landed because the room already understood the contradiction, the absurdity, and the public spectacle of it all. Jokes like that don't stick when the narrative feels solid and dignified. They stick when the public can feel that the image has turned strange. Humor becomes the delivery system for truth. That one-liner was funny, yes, but it was also devastating because it collapsed the fake seriousness around the perfectly moved on innocent man angle. And I know some people are going to say, well, hold on, Remy has her own relationship history in this public mess too, so why should she get to act righteous? Fair question. That is the counterweight here. Remy is not floating above all criticism. There were public reports, responses, cheating accusations, and ugly claims flying in all directions. This is not sainthood content. But that is precisely why I reject the cartoon version of the story. I'm not here to tell you one side is angelic. I'm here to tell you the Pap is the helpless victim. Script falls apart once you actually listen to everybody's own public words. That's the debunking. Not that Remy is perfect. That the victim branding is incomplete at best and manipulative at worst. Because what the culture has been signaling over and over is this: if you move like you're healed, if you talk like you're settled, if you present a new love like it's secure and mature and beyond question, then you do not get to act shocked when people expect the old chapter to actually be closed. And when it isn't, and when the old chapter keeps bleeding into the new one through interviews, clips, songs, jokes, and deflections, the audience starts seeing the system behind the story. Which brings me to the hard gear shift. Because now we have to stop talking about personalities for a second and talk about machinery. Not romance. Not clapbacks. Machinery. Here's the pattern interrupt. This is no longer just a celebrity breakup story. This is a case study in image management, brand preservation, and narrative leverage inside hip-hop media. And if you've been watching this like it's only about who said something shady on a record, you've been watching the wrong layer. Systemic angle 1 is brand equity. For years, Papoose benefited from one of the strongest intangible assets any rapper-adjacent public figure can have, the solid husband reputation. That brand had emotional equity. It made him legible to audiences beyond bars and mixtapes. It made him useful in discussions about loyalty and black love. It made him sympathetic by default. Once that kind of brand exists, the public does a lot of protective labor for you. They fill in gaps. They assume restraint. They reinterpret contradictions in your favor. That's what brand equity does. So when the marriage starts publicly collapsing, the instinct of the audience is not to ask, did we misunderstand him? It is to ask, how do we preserve the version of him we already invested in? That is why victim language attaches so quickly to him. The brand was preloaded for sympathy. Systemic angle 2 is platform incentives. Look at how this story keeps circulating. Interviews want emotional sound bites. Blogs want repostable quotes. Social clips want the line that sparks comments. Everybody in this media ecosystem is rewarded not for resolving complexity, but for extending tension. So when Claressa says something about being secure, when Remy goes live, when Papoose implies he wants peace, the platforms don't distribute the nuance. They distribute the contradiction. That means every participant is playing in a rigged arena where clarification often becomes more confusion once clipped, captioned, and recirculated. And yet that also means media-trained adults should know what stepping into that arena does. You do not go on a major platform and then act like it's unfair that the internet reads your words as public positioning. That is exactly what those platforms are for. Systemic Angle 3 is authorship and legacy warfare. When Papoose publicly claimed he wrote most of Remy's rhymes, that was not ordinary breakup pettiness. That was an attempt, whether emotional, strategic, or both, to reach back and rewrite the power balance of her career. In hip-hop, authorship is sacred currency. Say you help someone's pen and you are not just shading them, you are devaluing their mythology. So when Remy responded on W.Y.F.L. with bars rejecting that claim, she was fighting on the level that matters most in rap, not romance, but artistic legitimacy. That is why the record hit differently. It was not just, I'm mad at my ex. It was do not revise my legacy because the relationship died. One person went to the song. The other went to the story. That contrast matters. Systemic Angle 4 is the difference between private closure and public transition. In healthy public transitions, people either keep it truly quiet or they speak in ways that close loops. What we've seen here is the opposite. Loops reopening. Divorce discussed as pending. Relationship discussed as serious. Hurt denied here, acknowledged there, reframed elsewhere. This creates a vacuum, and vacuums in celebrity culture always get filled by narrative entrepreneurs, blogs, fan pages, YouTubers, reaction pages, commentators. That's not me being cute. That's the industry mechanism. If the principal people do not close the loop cleanly, content creators will build economies around the open loop. So when fans act scandalized that Remy keeps answering musically, they are missing that the loop was never properly closed in public to begin with. Systemic Angle 5 is gendered credibility. Watch how quickly women in these stories are expected to be either dignified or dismissed. If Remy speaks, she's bitter. If Claressa speaks, she's pressed. If they both speak, people act like female chaos is the real headline while the man in the middle somehow remains the tragic center. That is one of the oldest tricks in media storytelling. The women become the visible combustion, and the man becomes the implied prize, victim, or silent sufferer. But if you strip the framing away and just examine the facts, who benefited most from the old public image? Who got to keep the widest sympathy buffer the longest? Who is still being defended by people who treat contradiction like a minor inconvenience? Exactly. Systemic Angle 6 is the credibility of selective privacy. Papoose's general line, echoed in various coverage, is that social media spectacle is corny and that he wanted to keep things private. On paper, that sounds noble. In practice, selective privacy can be a shield, not a virtue. Because if you enter public interviews, allow public relationship framing, let public sympathy collect around you, and then claim privacy only when the contradictions get sharp, that is not privacy. That is asymmetrical storytelling. That is wanting the benefits of public image without the accountability of public scrutiny. The culture has to stop falling for that trick just because it is wrapped in a calmer tone of voice. Systemic Angle 7 is why the cease and desist chatter, whether you view it as smart legal positioning or desperation, symbolically matters so much. Hip-hop has always read the move from beat to paperwork in a very specific way. Fair or unfair, once the optics become record over here, legal pressure over there, the audience reads it as one side sounding stronger in the cultural arena. And because this whole feud is deeply entangled with image, that symbolism becomes lethal. Captain Cease and Desist is not just a joke nickname. It encapsulates what the public thinks it's watching, somebody who wants to control the story without taking the same kind of cultural hit response risk that rap commentary traditionally respects. So when I zoom out, the conclusion gets clearer. The false narrative is not just one wrong opinion on the timeline. The false narrative is the entire framing architecture that says Papoose is merely trapped between a bitter ex and an overly blamed new partner. No. The public statements suggest all three people have participated in shaping the story, but only one of them keeps getting handed the language of innocence by default. That default is the product of branding, platform incentives, gender bias, and the culture's love of a familiar archetype. This is bigger than one couple. This is how narratives get manufactured in plain sight. And now we get to the truth bomb, because once you line all of this up, the most damaging conclusion becomes hard to avoid. The central lie in this whole saga is not necessarily one single sentence anybody told. The central lie is the posture. The posture that Papoose can stand inside a public love story transition, benefit from a decade of good guy branding, allow a new relationship to be discussed as daily, serious, and secure, allow divorce talk to stay ambiguous, allow authorship claims to hit Remy's legacy, and still somehow occupy the position of wounded neutral. That posture is what I am not buying. That posture is what the evidence keeps undercutting. Because the moment you are publicly presented as loved every day, called every day, FaceTimed every day, moved on every day, and already deep into a new chapter, you lose access to the poor me, this is all being done to me performance. You can be hurt. You can be upset. You can have your side. But victim? In the totalizing sense the internet wants to grant you? No. Not when the public record shows active participation in a competing narrative ecosystem. Not when the old spouse is still publicly saying sign the papers. Not when the new partner is publicly explaining the divorce mechanics. Not when your image is still being defended by people who ignore every contradiction just because the brand once made them feel good. And to me, that is why Remy's responses, whether on a diss record, a freestyle, or a live, keep resonating with enough people to matter. Not because everybody believes every accusation. Not because she's flawless. But because she is attacking the posture. She is refusing to let a dead relationship be rewritten as a one-sided collapse where the man simply endured chaos until he was rescued by new love. She is saying, in her own aggressive, messy, artistic way, absolutely not. There was image management here. There was story control here. There was selective honesty here. And when you hear it that way, the record stops sounding random and starts sounding like narrative counter-programming. This is also why the public keeps circling back to Claressa's old contact with Remy, the cis energy people discuss, the DMs, the interviews, the defensive clarifications, and the very public future-facing talk. Whether every online interpretation of those pieces is fair is almost beside the point now. The reason they stick is because they all feed the same feeling, that the official story is cleaner than the actual sequence probably was. And once audiences sense sanitization, they become obsessed. They start reading everything harder. Every interview answer gets slowed down. Every lyric gets dissected. Every holiday photo becomes evidence. Every joke becomes a thesis statement. So here is the reveal in one line. Papoose is not suffering from being unfairly dragged into a false narrative. He is suffering from the collapse of a narrative that used to protect him. And that is a completely different thing. That shift matters because if the protection story is gone, then the audience starts judging the present more harshly. They start asking why the paperwork is still a cloud. They start asking why the new relationship needs so much public defense. They start asking why legacy claims came out once the marriage got ugly. They start asking why the people who say move on keep feeding the machine. And once those questions start, the old brand cannot save you forever. And that brings us to the landing, because in the middle of all this noise, one thing keeps standing out to me. The person still gaining the most cultural oxygen is the one with the pen. That matters. Remy's strength here is not perfection. It is authorship. It is the ability to answer a reputation war in a medium the culture still respects. One person is trying to preserve an image through explanation, denial, or damage control. The other is walking into tracks and making the conversation reset around bars. One person keeps ending up in the comment section as a topic. The other keeps turning the topic into content. That is a huge difference. And let's be honest, that is why so many people sound irritated whenever Remy pops out with another clip, another verse, another jab, another reminder that she can still rap at a high level. Because the false narrative wanted her reduced to the scorned ex with no leverage. But leverage is exactly what she still has. She has memory leverage because people remember the original Black Love branding. She has lyrical leverage because when she responds on Wax it lands as culturally legible. She has contradiction leverage because every new public statement from the other side risks reopening questions instead of closing them. That is not accidental power. That is the power of somebody who knows the story is still unstable. Now, do I think this means Remy wins every moral category? No, that would be lazy. But I do think she wins the authenticity battle more often than people want to admit, because her core message has remained surprisingly consistent under all the chaos. Stop lying. Stop rewriting. Stop pretending this unfolded in some neat, respectable way that leaves one person spotless and everybody else crazy. And whether that message comes out elegantly or explosively, the audience hears the same demand underneath it: keep it real. Here's the one-liner that sums up the whole mess. One side keeps asking the public to trust the image. The other side keeps forcing the public to inspect the footage. And when you inspect the footage, what do you see? You see a marriage brand that broke. You see a new relationship that wanted legitimacy now, not later. You see a divorce story that keeps sounding both advanced and unfinished at the same time. You see legacy claims weaponized in the aftermath. You see women absorbing the heat while the man in the middle keeps getting offered the easiest emotional framing. And you see a rapper refusing to let history be rewritten without resistance. To me, that is why the right person is still standing strongest in the culture. Not because she has no flaws. Because the evidence keeps speaking in her direction whenever the story gets reopened. And this is only the start, because there are still at least 2 concrete developments that could shift this whole saga again. The first is the actual divorce status, because until that chapter is formally closed, every public love story appearance, every interview answer, and every music response is going to be judged through the lens of unfinished business. The second is the music and media piece, because if Remy keeps using records and freestyles to answer this situation while the other side keeps using interviews, posts, or legal optics, the culture is going to keep choosing which language it respects more. That gap can widen fast. So if you've been watching this whole thing like it's simple, it's not simple. If you've been watching it like Pap is the sole victim, I really think the public record says otherwise. If you've been watching it like Remy is just randomly obsessed, then you are missing the larger battle over authorship, image, and historical memory. And if you've made it this far, you already know this story is not cooling off because the contradictions are still too alive. So keep your eyes on the next interview, the next filing, the next verse, and the next time somebody tries to quietly smuggle that poor innocent Pap storyline back into the room like we all forgot the timeline. We did not forget. And the next video you need to watch after this is the one where we break down how celebrity, black love, branding turns into a shield long after the relationship itself has collapsed, because the shock there is not just that the image was powerful. It's how many people kept defending the image after the facts got ugly, and the payoff is realizing that half of modern hip-hop commentary is really a fight over branding disguised as romance.